Call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum tonight. This is the October 15th regular meeting of the Edina School Board. We start the same way, which is to have our superintendent review the agenda in very brief fashion.
So you'll have approval of minutes. We'll hear from members of the audience. On our consent, some personal recommendations, of course, the expenditures, student travel. And then in reports, you'll have a report, which is really the main focus of tonight's meeting, is the district financial audit. In discussion, you'll have a discussion around Legislative Action Committee bylaws and policy updates for 205, 206, 209. Then in action, you'll approve the audit, medical insurance, and approve policies 103 and 509. And we have a staff recognition. So with that, Chair Olin Friedman, that's our board meeting tonight.
All right, thank you. The first is approving the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from September 24th work session, September 24th regular meeting, and the October 10th work session?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any changes? All those in favor of approving the minutes from September 24th work session, September 24th regular meeting, and October 10th work session, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, we have hearings from members of the audience. We do value community input. We do have two methods for community input. We do have a 6:30 meeting, which people can take advantage of, in which they can ask questions, provided they give them to the district 1 week in advance. And then the 6:30 meeting is more of an exchange where you can ask a question and get a response. The 7 o'clock session, which is now, is a time period for people to come up and make comments to the board. We typically do not respond to the comments at the time they're made. There will be follow-up by somebody else. We ask that you do not make complaints about individuals. If you have complaints about individuals, they should be brought separately. And with that, we will start with Amanda Kerr. Or perhaps not. Next is Winnie Martin. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me. I wanted to come in tonight and really just talk a little bit about enrollment data and numbers. And I had sent an email requesting, or I guess I should say with a couple of questions to administration, and due to time constraints, I didn't hear back on that. But I wanted to, actually I should give these to you guys first. I had sent these by email. Usually every October we deliver the enrollment and ADM report, but obviously this year, October, this meeting came up earlier, I guess, than in previous years. But with that said, I wanted to compile some information for the board. So when we do have the numbers, we have some historical data specific to that, and I think this also would help in answering a lot of the questions the community had about enrollment, about open enrollment, ins, outs, things like that. And where I pulled this information from, it's all of the October board-released agenda items for all the way back to 2012. And I stopped there because data prior to that was only based on a percentage basis. So it was helpful to have the numbers after that. But what I really wanted to point out is that, you know, previously we've always run right around that 8,500 enrollment number. And as our business administration has told us many, many years, that's an incredibly difficult number to target. I know that's what we base our budget off of as well. But a couple of key points here is that we have always had more students, at least for the past 3 years historically, leave our district than have come in. So, you know, often people say, well, our open enrollment is much higher than our exit or our out. And that's not always the case, as indicated by these numbers. There are some extra copies that are up here that anyone in the audience, if they would like to take a copy as well, take one. But I really just wanted to put this all in aggregated format so you could see it by school, by grade. So when we do get the enrollment numbers, it will give everyone, I guess, more of a historical average of where we've been. And it was shocking to me to find out years ago that on average we have 1,400 to 1,500 students leave this district and choose other schools every year. But I think that speaks to the excellent educational opportunities that are available within our community, but it also speaks to the commitment to education that this community has. So that's really all I wanted to share with you all tonight. And some of the questions that I had asked via the email, I do hope to get an answer on. So I know I shared it with lead admin. I did carbon copy the board chairs on it. I can direct that to you all if that's easier. I apologize for my misnomers of addressing. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Do you guys have the extra copies of this? I believe Sarah has them.
Next is Jennifer Wood. Welcome.
Thank you. I have a son in the Edina Public Schools. I am here to.
Can't hear her. Can't hear her.
Yes, I was just going to say, could you speak right into the mic? It's kind of hard sometimes.
All right.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the interruption.
I am here to share with the board an incident that occurred a couple of weeks ago. I believe this incident reflects a systemic and chronic problem that has plagued the district for years and that needs to be addressed. We are all coming off of the very rancorous and polarizing Senate Judiciary Committee hearings. The incident I'm relating occurred in the midst of all that. The week following the hearing where Judge Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford testified, when that additional FBI investigation was going on, my child was met at class by his teacher wearing a button that said, "I believe Dr. Christine Blasey Ford." The class was not a current events class, it was a STEM class. The teacher wore the button for 3 days. Regardless of whether I share the teacher's opinion, I was shocked that the school allowed this, or at a minimum, created an environment where the teacher felt licensed to do it. It was not only extremely poor judgment, it was unprofessional and unethical. To think that a teacher was so caught up in expressing his social political views that he risked alienating some of his students and distracting them from the subject matter he was teaching. Viewed from the eyes of an adult, it was gratuitous and self-indulgent. I would never dream of doing that at my job. Viewed from the eyes of a student who may not agree with him, it would be alienating and intimidating to have the person who has complete authority over you and your grade saying essentially, "I care a lot about this, I have a strong opinion about it, and I want you to share it." It is vital to the integrity of the learning process and to the credibility of this institution to refrain from allowing social political activism to cloud your mission. I would be just as disturbed if a teacher wore a button that said, "I believe Brett Kavanaugh." I asked myself what I wanted to achieve by making this public comment. Honestly, by the time parents hear about these kinds of things, the damage has already been done, so the effectiveness of a retroactive remedy is all but lost. What I would like to see is a concerted effort going forward by the school board and the administration to demand a laser focus on academics and to train staff that if they cannot refrain from using their position for social and political activism, they should find another job in another field or at least in another district. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Orlando Flores. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Orlando Flores. It's been a few months. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's been a few months since I came here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again. At that meeting, the board spoke about the low book Lexile scores, the number of movies being watched in classes, and even replacing books with comic books. So it was an entertaining discussion. But with that as background, I want to speak to you today more broadly about the important board role in setting a strategy that ensures that the school is pursuing academic excellence and that it provides a safe learning environment. New test school scores came out recently. For the 5th or 6th year in a row, basically since the All-for-All program was implemented, average math and reading scores for Edina High School have decreased. Falling scores mean that students are less and less prepared to be successful workers and professionals. Results for nearly all races have come down, including whites, blacks, and especially Hispanics. Even as scores for white students decreased, low-income and minority student scores in many cases are coming down faster. The achievement gap is getting worse in Edina under All-for-All. This is ironic and frankly tragic, since according to our own website, All-for-All was implemented to close that gap. Based on personal experience, low-income students need to focus on strong academics during the school days. They have no fallback systems like wealthier students. Private tutors, and in many cases even strong parental involvement, is really difficult. Parents are working multiple jobs, sometimes they don't speak English, and they often don't understand the American school system. This is why focusing on strong academics during the school day is so important. Across the board in the Edina school system, pursuant to the All-for-All strategy, our children are being educated less and less. How can you change these results? I believe that you must hold the superintendent accountable for objective improvement in test scores. You set his objectives, but are you holding him accountable for objective results, improvements? The All-for-All school strategy says little or nothing about pursuing academic excellence for that matter, and that needs to change. Another fundamental responsibility of a board is to ensure that students experience a safe learning environment. Yet last fall, a student testified here that she was in a class where activists were invited by a teacher to speak, and these activists singled out white students, aggressively pointing fingers at them and calling them effing whites. The student who gave you that feedback was terrified, but she found the courage to tell you about it here. I understand that similar situations have happened to dozens of students in Edina on multiple occasions. Being racially profiled is discouraging and unforgettable. The year that I arrived in Minnesota, I was called the S word that is reserved for Hispanics before I even knew what that word meant. But at least I wasn't called this and other names by someone formally invited into the classroom. So I have to ask you, in what alternative universe do we now live in Edina, where our students are verbally assaulted based on race by guests formally invited into the classroom? I also understand that under the All-for-All strategy, it is now standard in Edina to hold students of one race responsible for discriminatory practices that other people committed on other people. So let me rephrase what happened to the student who spoke to you. Under the direction of this administration, a classroom school guest verbally assaulted students based on their race, likely in violation of their civil rights. This has happened repeatedly and likely continues to happen today. And as far as the public is concerned, neither the administration nor you have done anything about it. I say that because none of the families have been contacted to inquire as to what happened, and I know some of these families. No questions, no knowledge of an investigation, no apologies, nothing. And when members of the administration are asked about incidents like this in private, they often reply, "Wow, that's the first time I hear about this."
Could you wrap up, please? It's already been 5 minutes, just
Okay.
according to my timer.
Yep, thank you. The community is under the impression that nothing has been done. I think you have a responsibility to change the lack of focus on improving scores and to provide a safe school environment. And you have an opportunity here to demonstrate that you live up to these basic principles of accountability for the benefit of students and parents. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Heather Teets. Welcome.
So tonight I'm here to ask about the strategic plan, because when I was reading documents out on the website, it said that November would be presenting the first draft of the strategic plan. I don't know if that schedule is still ongoing or not. But we have pushed off a lot of discussion in these board meetings over the last probably year, saying we're waiting for the strategic plan. So I'm asking you about this. And specifically, I'm asking about differentiation and meeting the needs of all of our learners. You know, we had a member of the administration say, well, we have no need for differentiation because most of our kids go to college. I'm really hoping, board meeting in June, you can go check. And he said it publicly multiple times. So I'm really hoping that's not where the board is, right? When we have 1 in 4 students who are participating in gifted services, when we have 1 in 3 students who are in the 90th percentile and above on standardized tests, when we have 2 out of 3 students, you know, in the upper quintile in standardized tests, we have to differentiate. Meeting the standards is not what I think Edina is about. We need to differentiate if we're going to meet those like academic needs, right? We are not just about getting into college, you know, going to college and having a high percentage going to college. We are about being accepted and excelling in the college of the person's choice or in whatever post-secondary and professional life beyond. So I'm asking you, with the strategic plan, that we be very clear about whether we expect differentiation and what type of differentiation we expect. I have heard members of this board publicly in these meetings say that they expect to see, you know, enriched classes or separate honors classes. But in the implementation phase of the Gifted Talent Study, I have seen no work by the administration to do that, right? I'm really hoping that the strategic plan, it will be very crisp and very clear what those expectations are, because that is a board's privilege to come out and say what the expectations and policies are. Yes, the administration gets to implement, but I work in a governing position in corporate, and I get to say what the policy is, and if the implementation is not meeting that policy, I can say try again. So what I'm asking is for that strategic plan that we've all been waiting for to be very crisp, and if you do want to support the enriched and honors classes, that you be very explicit in what format that can come. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mary Pat Pusey.
What's that? I survived camp. I still look like I'm on a camping trip.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. I am here. My name is Mary Pat Pusey. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of Scouting, or specifically Cub Scouts. For the last 3 years, I have served as the activities coordinator for Cub Scout Pack 123 at Highlands Elementary, and I'm here to express some concern about the evolution of our facilities policies in terms of access for community groups like Scouting. It appears, or it feels like, the policies are evolving to serve the bureaucracy of the school district rather than to serve the needs of the community. And to kind of explain this, the first year as activities coordinator, from a budget perspective, it cost our PAC $60 to reserve space at the elementary school for our PAC meetings and DEN meetings. Those charges were primarily, there was a $15 charge for each kind of reservation. You could reserve as many dates and as many rooms as you needed. And because, you know, I made the PAC calendar and other people made the DEN meeting calendars, each of the DEN leaders, we had kind of multiple $15 charges. The second year, the school or the district implemented a need for a security monitor. And that security monitor fee was apparently $20 per hour with a minimum charge of $40. And that was initially being charged to each room reservation. So if our PAC reserved 4 rooms, we were being charged $40 per room that we were reserving. We did go back and talked with the committee, and we were able to negotiate that such that if we consolidated all of our meeting reservations to one night, we were only charged the security monitor fee for one security monitor fee for the independent of the number of rooms that we reserved. This year, we are now being charged the security monitor fee plus room rental fees on top of that. So what that translates into is roughly a need to increase our PAC dues, our dues per student, by about 35% just to cover the facility reservations. When I think about, I think of our schools as community assets, similar to our public libraries. I can go and reserve meeting space at the public library for no charge. It's, when I think about scouting, scouting is really an extension of our school programs. We support similar values. We help build community amongst members in the school community. We support, building youth character, building service, attitudes and community service. And these are all important to building our community. Now, I understand the need to implement security, having a security monitor there. Despite the fact that there's never been an issue in the building with respect to scouting programs going on, but at the same time, by locking down our buildings and making it difficult for community groups to access meeting space, what we do is actually put more of our security in our community at risk, because these programs promote building of community and recognition amongst citizens and amongst students, such that that is part of addressing security concerns in the community, because we all know each other, right? And when we're not able to access those facilities, we're going other places. Where would you rather have your kids going? To the library for their scout meeting, or being able to go to their school where they participate during the day? I guess that's kind of my perspective. I guess my other concern is the lack of transparency and communication with regard to how these policy changes are rolled out. In each case, I never found out about it until after we got the invoice and had to go back and readdress it. It would seem like as we're making these policy changes that we would seek the input from these community groups and at least communicate, if the decision has been made to change the policy, communicate clearly what that policy change is sufficiently in advance of the start of the school year, such that we can make financial adjustments to our dues in order to cover those increased costs. And in each case, that hasn't been what's happened over the last 2 years. So I'm hoping that the school board can kind of take this into consideration and really talk about how do we establish a consistent policy that supports community groups, that support the missions of our schools and support the building of community in Edina.
Thank you. That concludes hearing from members of the audience. Thank you very much. Again, I remind people that we do have a 6:30 session available for those who want to ask questions and get responses to the questions at the same time. Next, we have the consent agenda. Are there any items anybody wishes to remove from the consent agenda?
Yes.
We'll let Ellen go first.
The travel,
So item C,
item C.
and Sarah, did you have a different one?
I was just to say C1, but C works for me.
Okay. Any other removals? Otherwise, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, which is now items A and B?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Do you want to, since you seem, let's get a motion to approve the EHS biology to Borneo.
That's the one I'd like to discuss.
Right.
So
this would be
motion
that.
to approve.
Second.
And now you have questions?
Yeah, I would, this trip is going to take place next, not this coming year, but, and it is extremely expensive. And I think that I would like to wait, the policy committee is currently working on a student travel plan policy. So I would like to put this one on hold until we can have the board discuss whether or not this is the type of trip that we would want to support.
So Susan, is there a time pressure on this one?
The timeframe would be summer of 2020, probably the first 2 weeks in July.
So, but in terms of, it doesn't need to get approved at today's meeting for it to go forward, is that correct?
That is correct. There's additional time for discussion.
So are there, you would,
So, yeah, when would we need to have this decided by?
So sorry. In accordance with current policy, 18 months prior to travel. So that would be, I'd have to count backward.
Yeah.
So
no, January, December?
January, December, January.
So not for a couple more months?
That's the way it sounds. Yep.
Are there questions that people have today about the program? Or Ellen, are you just trying to see how this might align with 538 if it's revised? And 538 is the travel policy.
Right, I guess the reason I was going to pull it is the same reason. We're discussing this in policy right now. We've talked about concerns about very expensive trips like this. We've talked about, are there opportunities like this that are within the continental U.S. where they can get these same type of opportunities, where more kids can have access to it? This is a $4,600 plus trip. And I think with us still discussing this policy, to approve it right now doesn't seem like the right time. I also, just generally have concerns about details of expense. So I know we have the full cost per student, but we've talked about wanting to better understand the total costs of these trips that the students are having to pick up so that their sponsors, whether parents, guardians, et cetera, understand, what makes up the $4,600 in terms of fees to cover other personnel that need to attend the trip, chaperones, et cetera, and then, how are the costs broken down? And we're still trying to figure out how we want to take a closer look at those types of things. So until we have more information on the policy and our thoughts behind that, I find it difficult to approve this at this point. When will we have more information on the policy?
I've got another comment to make. Sorry, another comment I'm wondering about too is, given the period of belt tightening that we're in right now, I'm wondering how much staff time it costs and takes to actually vet these programs and to look at that. Just kind of curious about how much it costs to investigate how much these trips will cost and to make the arrangements and so forth.
Because I think what he's referring to, and what I had kind of mentioned at the last board meeting, is the concept of aligning to our mission and making sure our dollars follow our mission. And so if there is a large expense related to coordinating these trips, is that the best use of our dollars in terms of education and where we're putting them?
So I have a question about chaperones, and we'll get back to the trip itself, which is there are 4 chaperones. I think it says, if I can get there, a biology teacher and 3 additional licensed staff.
Up to 3 additional licensed staff.
So who pays for the 4 individuals that are listed as supervision?
So the travel company that we partner with in the vast majority of our student travel experiences calculate the entire cost of the experience for the anticipated number of students, a range of students, and then the appropriate number of chaperones. Most of the companies suggest a ratio of 1 chaperone to every 5 to 6 students. Our policy says 1 chaperone to every 12 students. So we often negotiate with the travel agency or the travel partner we're working with to recalculate their formula, but ultimately, the entire cost is calculated as a group and then divided by the number of students who will participate.
So does that mean the students pay for the 4 chaperones?
So the cost of all chaperones that are licensed, or excuse me, assigned to the experience by the school would be covered by the student. Additional chaperones who would travel as, upon request or as partners to perhaps some of the chaperones or parents would pay their own costs.
So in this case, the up to 4 is what's listed.
Correct. At this point in the planning, we anticipate 20 students, and we are anticipating there would be 3 chaperones. But for the purpose of the proposal, it was up to 4.
And then the cost of the 3 would then be borne by the 20 students going.
That is correct.
Are there other questions? So the motion is whether to approve the particular travel. That's what the current motion is. So I think that, and we're going to stay with that motion for the moment, but I think that what your request is more of a, to table this.
Can we make a friendly amendment to table it, or do we have to pull the motion?
That's what I'm working on, trying to figure that out. So
Oh.
I think, so I guess then do you want to change what your motion is? Right. Okay, so you want to change your motion to approve it, to table it until the next meeting or until before the end of this year?
Move to table this.
Okay,
Your mic's not on.
all right.
Oh, do I,
Yeah.
you heard me. I moved to, I moved to table it until next meeting.
So yes, I can hear you, but the audio doesn't pick up on the tape. So
I would
can
second that. Could we move to table it until December, though, since that's still within the window?
Right.
Thank you. Then I second the motion.
Okay, so we're going to substitute that motion for the prior motion that was brought. Are there any questions, discussions? All those in favor of tabling this until December, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Are there, before I get a motion on the next ones, are there questions on the next 3, the Chicago, Orlando, and DC? All right, so can I get a consolidated motion to approve the trips to Chicago, Orlando, and DC?
So moved.
Any questions? I actually have one question on the DC trip, which is, each year that goes, is that partly during the school year and partly on a weekend?
Yes, that's correct. They schedule it typically leaving on a Thursday night or Friday morning, returning on a Monday or a Tuesday.
All
So
right.
the students miss 2 days of school typically.
And I'm going to vote in favor of this, but I'm just curious as to why in the future, since it's a week and a half after spring break, why it couldn't just be arranged in the future during spring break. And there may be an answer, but it's just something to look at.
The answer would be that Washington DC is typically very crowded over our spring break and the week following. And so that window really opens up that first weekend in April, allowing our students access to monuments, other areas of the White House that they normally would not be able to see during spring break. So it's about access.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. Are there other questions regarding the 3 trips? Okay, all those in favor of approving the trips to Chicago, Orlando, and DC, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. We are on to reports. Margot and our auditors. Welcome. Should we be worried that you brought something to drink with you? And I know it's water, by the way. I mean, we're not planning on like a couple hours. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair Wallen, Friedman, Superintendent Schultz, and School Board. I have with me here tonight Bill Lauer from MMKR, the school district audit firm. We are at that time of year, months worth of work, and many, many hours of completing our 17-18 audit. I would like to report Bill's team, thank them for a great partnership, and along with the business office under the leadership of Rod Choth, the controller, did a fantastic job working through this year's audit. We start communications in the beginning of June, have auditors here in July and August and September, and it's an ongoing process for a number of months. Happy to also report that this is the first full year on our new finance system, and now we have everything on the system, and it's good to be reviewing our own historical data on that new finance system. We did, Bill and another member of his team were at the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting last week, providing a little bit more detail than you'll receive tonight in terms of audit results. What I will do, just quickly summarize overview in terms of comparing it to projection when I last reported to you in June in the estimates. We're within 1% of budget on revenue. I'm trying not to steal too much of your thunder here. And when you take out carryovers on the expenditure side and some capital costs, we're within 1% of it. Budget on expenditures. There is one accounting, and Bill will show it, how we have to account for what's called non-spendable. It's prepaid expenses. You'll see that went up a little bit, and we try to keep that as level as possible, but we had a higher prepaid expense this year, and if we account for that, basically in July 1, that becomes in the available fund balance. If we account for that, we're within 0.1% of projected unassigned fund balance. So that's just a very, very quick overview, just because I know I had questions at Finance Committee as well on that. And feel free to email me or give me a call if you have any further questions. But with that, I will let Bill give the report, and collectively we can answer any questions you have. Do you want me to do that, or you want to do that? Okay.
Good evening, Superintendent, members of the board. As Margot mentioned, we went over this in some detail at a board workshop prior to this meeting. So what I intend to do tonight is just briefly go through kind of the audit process, the results that were in the opinions that we issued as a result of that process, and then very briefly just touch on a couple of the very high-level financial numbers that we talked about in more detail at that Finance Committee meeting. The first thing that I'm required to do is make sure to remind you each year what our role was with regard to the reports that you received. The primary document you received, the district's annual financial report and supplemental information. All of the information, the data and disclosures that are in that report are the responsibility of district management. We come out and perform our audit process, provide an opinion as to whether it fairly presents your financial position and results for the year under audit. In addition, because the district earns more than $750,000 each year in federal grants, you're subject to a separate, what's referred to as a single audit of those federal awards expenditures. So you will see a separate schedule of those and a separate opinion on that schedule. We are required to test internal controls and compliance on several levels. First of all, on that financial reporting level, there's a separate set of controls and compliance we have to test for that federal single audit, and you're also subject to an audit of your compliance with Minnesota laws and regulations. We audit to a guide that's put out by the Minnesota State Auditor's Office for that. And then finally, because the district has elected, as many districts do, to maintain your extracurricular student activity accounts, what we refer to as outside of board control. They're not reported as part of your general fund. Instead, you receive a separate report as far as those accounts are concerned, showing the cash receipts and disbursements for the year, and there's a separate report letter on
controls and compliance for that as well. As Margot mentioned, from a process standpoint, I thought things went very well this year. I know that Margot mentioned the software conversion being a good thing, but usually to accountants, that's not necessarily the words you want to hear. It always, especially once you're one of the districts piloting that, there are always some bumps that you run into. And despite the fact that you were going through that, everything was well prepared for the audit. The records were in good condition, other than getting a few things uploaded to the state and some last minute issues with that. Everything went very smoothly. And I think the results of the audit process reflect that. As far as our opinion on the basic financial statements, we again issued what's referred to as a clean opinion or unmodified. It's the highest opinion that we can give. We had no issues with that report. We do have an explanatory paragraph in that opinion again this year, kind of highlighting an accounting change you're going to see if you look at the statements. This is kind of the third piece of kind of a long implementation you've been seeing over the last several years of changes in accounting for pensions and other post-employment benefits. A few years back, you had a change that made you bring in your proportionate share of the statewide PERA and TRA pension plan liabilities into your entity-wide statements. Last year, there was an accounting change under which you changed how you accounted for a small district pension plan that you have outstanding. And this is kind of the last piece, your other post-employment benefits. These are other non-pension benefits you pay to retirees. The accounting for that changed this year. Hopefully this will be the last change in a while. But when you implemented this standard, essentially what it did is take your reporting for these liabilities and change it from something where you were amortizing that liability onto your entity-wide financial statements kind of year by year to the same kind of reporting you do for pensions, where you're now reporting that full estimated liability on your entity-wide statements. So as a result of that change, you'll see on your government-wide financial statements about a $9 million reduction in your beginning net position due to that change in accounting principle. It doesn't change how anything runs through your fund-based statements. It doesn't change how the expense is paid for them. It's just something that is on your entity-wide statements, and I'll kind of show the difference between those two as we go forward. From a financial reporting standpoint, we had no issues to report either from an internal control or a compliance standpoint. From a Minnesota legal compliance standpoint, there was one compliance issue we reported this year. 3 of 40 disbursements were paid outside of the 35-day limit that you have to pay invoices that you receive for goods or services. As we talked at the workshop, I think this is something that can be easily corrected procedurally. All 3 of these cases were invoices where when the invoice was received, instead of going directly to the finance department, it went to other departments for approval before coming back. We start that 35-day clock from the point where that invoice gets stamped as received by the district, and the ones that weren't going directly to the finance department weren't getting stamped. So the only thing we have to go by then is the date that was on the vendor invoice. So if they're running those invoices the first of the month and you might not get them till the 10th, all we can do is start that clock by the date on that invoice. So we suggested in talking to Ra and Margot and their staff maybe changing procedures to make sure those are all getting stamped when they come in the door, even before they're going out for the required approvals. As far as the federal single audit, we did issue a clean opinion again this year, saying that those federal awards expenditures were fairly stated in relation to your overall financial statements. We had no weaknesses in internal control or compliance findings to report this year. In fact, one of the things that we do is follow up on any findings that were reported in the previous year. And in 2017, in your audit of your federal special education programs, we noted that you had some issues with making sure that you had documentation for time and effort for each of the salaried or hourly employees that you that you claim for federal reimbursement under those grants. You have to have additional documentation as to what programs they're working in. In 2017, some of that was not, that documentation was not provided. We tested the same program again this year. We tested that, and all of the documentation was as it should be this year. So I'm happy to report that finding was mitigated and cleaned up in 2018. And then finally, your student activity accounts. We issued a clean opinion on the cash receipts and disbursements of those accounts. This report is on the regulatory basis of accounting that the Department of Education requires, essentially just showing cash receipts and disbursements. We do, for all reports like this, we do qualify our opinion that we're only reporting or opining on the recorded receipts, because you don't have the controls out over the student activity accounts that you do for receipts coming through your business office. Also, under internal controls and compliance for this, we did have one compliance issue to report here. Each of these disbursements is required to have an approval documented for both the faculty advisor over the account that's spending the dollars and a student treasurer or a student designee for the particular club approving those expenditures. Two of the disbursements we tested had the appropriate faculty sign off, but lacked the student approval. So something you should try and make sure you have on each of those. Are there questions on any of this before I move along to some of the financial information? Okay.
Could you give an example of what the two disbursements that they lacked approval, what is that?
I don't remember the details off the top of my head, but typically these are student organizations, so it could have been like a student council, paying for something, and you'd have to have a signature approving that disbursement from both whoever the student representative is for the student council and whatever faculty person is overseeing that, and the only one that had signed off on that was the faculty. I can get you the detail, or Margot can.
That gives me an idea. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. All right, then I will just briefly go through some of the high-level financial information that we discussed again at the workshop. The district's primary fund is its general fund. At the end of 2018, you had about $33 million in cash in this fund, and a total fund balance of about $13.7 million. Cash went down by about $480,000 from the year before. Total fund balance went down by about $5 million. One of the reasons that I wanted to put this graph up is to just make sure you were aware of a kind of an unusual trend that happened for 2018. The main difference you see between your year-end cash balances and your year-end fund balances is due to the fact that your property tax levies are collected on a calendar year and you're operating on a July 1 to June 30 year. So the first half tax collections that you get in May for your 2018 property taxes, you have the cash, but they don't hit your fund balance and they aren't taken into revenue until the following fiscal year. That's why you see, if you look at the trend there, you typically have a higher cash balance than fund balance. As I mentioned, your cash went down about $500,000, where your fund balance went down $5 million this year. The main reason for that difference is because of the change in the federal income tax code that happened. We saw a lot of people prepaying their 2018 real estate taxes, hoping to capture that deduction as it was going away in 2018. So a lot of that got prepaid in December of 2017. You received it in May. So you just got a more cash kind of inflow in May than you typically would. A higher percentage of your levy was collected with that first half. So that actually benefited the district for this year, but it's not something that will continue as it goes forward. Looking at the pieces of that fund balance, you report four or five separate elements of fund balance in the general fund. The first category is that non-spendable fund balance. So this is primarily, in your case, I think entirely prepaid expenses. The reason this went up from about $129,000 to $714,000 this year was primarily because of one invoice that you paid early for your July health insurance that got paid on June 30 instead of July 1. So it's just a timing thing. As Margot mentioned, usually that would be getting paid out of that unassigned fund balance as you go forward, but just happened to cut the check a little early there. The unrestricted portion of fund balance is made up of those final three categories: committed, assigned, and unassigned. Committed and assigned are earmarked either by the board itself or by your designee. And essentially, these are internal earmarks and for uses of funds that have been accumulated. You spent committed fund balances down by about $1.9 million from the year before. Part of that was some federal funding received in prior years that was set aside for particular purposes. And part of that also was you changed your policy as far as what you were committing for future cash flow. That was reduced by about $1 million. The assigned fund balances were spent down by about $2.25 million. There were two specific assignments you made, one for $1.5 million for next generation program implementation and about $750,000 for bond operational costs that were budgeted to be spent down in fiscal 18. The unassigned portion of fund balance, kind of that residual, went down by about $1.6 million. So in total, as I mentioned, your fund balance went down by about $5 million. However, your budget had anticipated spending fund balance down by about $8.7 million. So overall, you ended up about $3.5 million better in general fund balance than your final budget. Looking at the revenue side of the equation in the general fund, one of the things that drives the amount of revenue you earn as a district each year is the number of students you serve for general education aid. You served an average daily membership in 2018 of about 8,455 students. When you apply the weighting factors, that turned into about 9,266 pupil units. Your district has been very stable over the last 6 or 7 years as far as the level of students you're serving. It typically varies about 0.5% from year to year, but you did see a drop for 2018 of about 28 pupil units, roughly 0.3% in students served for aid.
Clarify for the audience, 2018 represents our school year of 17-18?
Yes.
Thanks.
This graph shows your general fund revenue for the prior year, current year, and current year budget. My current year, 2018. Your general fund revenue in fiscal 18 was about $111 million. You were over budget by a little under 1% in total revenues, about $993,000. Most of that came in what we show here as that final other category. You collected some donations for your Normandale Elementary playground. You had some higher rebates. Your investment income was a little better than projected because of the market in 2018. Offsetting that, your state aids were about $675,000 under budget, mainly due to that drop in the number of students that you served. As you can see from the graph there, as I mentioned, most of your revenue does come from the first two sources on there. Your property tax levy provides about 27% of your revenue in the general fund. Your state aids make up about 2/3 of your general fund revenue. So from 2017 to fiscal 2018, your revenues did go up by about 2.5%. Most of that increase was in that state aid category. General education aid saw a 2% increase on the formula. So you got about $1.8 million in additional state aid in 18 compared to the prior year. And then that other category also went up due to those additional donations that you had for your playground primarily. On the expenditure side, you spent just under $108 million in the general fund in 2018. You were about $7.9 million under your budget, but that's really kind of misleading. It's basically due to how you're budgeting your long-term facilities maintenance levy. That revenue comes into the general fund. If the projects are smaller, you spend it in the general fund. If they're larger, you make a transfer over to your building construction fund. This year, essentially, that whole levy got transferred over and spent in a different fund. So your expenditures were under, but you had a transfer of $7.8 million to another fund that basically offset that. As Margot mentioned, you kind of take that out, and you're pretty much right on budget from that standpoint. And to talk just briefly on some of your other operating funds, your food service fund, you spend a little over $3 million, about $3.2 million annually to provide student breakfast and lunches. For 2018, you ended the year with a fund balance of about $1 million in that food service fund. You spent that down about $140,000 from the prior year, but you actually budgeted to spend it down a little over $300,000. So your year-end fund balance is roughly $165,000 higher than projected in your final budget. And that ending fund balance in this fund represents about 30% of your annual expenditures in that fund, so that's in a very healthy ending position. Your community service fund, you spend a little over $7 million a year to provide community education programs to the public. At the end of 2018, you had a fund balance of about $740,000 in this fund, which represents a little over 10% of your annual costs in this fund. Your fund balance did go up by about $260,000 compared to last year, about $24,000 higher than you'd projected in your budget. And you will see from the graph it did kind of make a comeback from the prior year. In 2017, your revenues were down quite a bit for a couple of reasons. You were doing some program reorganization, and you also had some construction going on that limited the classroom space available, so you had less program offerings than you did in a typical year. In 2018, those revenues rebounded nicely. You were up almost $700,000 in revenues in this fund in 2018, now that you're up and running a full program again. Not pictured here, but worth mentioning, the capital projects fund we talked about before is primarily where you spend down your building bonds that you've issued and some of these long-term facility maintenance dollars that we talked about. During 2018, the district completed almost $60 million of construction projects. You still have, at the end of the year, just under $20 million in that fund of unspent bond proceeds and the long-term facility maintenance levy dollars for future projects and wrapping up the ones that you have in process. Then the last thing I wanted to go over just briefly is, as I mentioned before, the statement of net position. So you kind of have two levels of reporting in your financial statements. The fund-based statements that we just went through, and then the entity-wide or government-wide financial statements. And these take all of that fund information, put them into a single presentation, and convert everything to a full accrual basis. So some long-term things like your capital assets and depreciation, your outstanding bonds, some of these pension and OPEB liabilities that aren't reported in those fund financial statements are brought into this presentation, so it gives you a longer-term look at your financial position. So at the end of 2018, you had a government-wide net position deficit of about $71 million. That deficit grew by about $30 million from the year before. As you can see, the top piece of this, if you can if it's big enough to read, kind of walks you through how you get from your government fund balances that we just discussed to that net position. And you can see that the majority of that deficit that we're talking about, or all of it really, is due to those pension and OPEB liabilities. You see about $157 million in liabilities from all those plans. A little over 30 million of that relates to district-specific plans. The rest of that, roughly 125 million or so, relates to your proportionate share of the statewide PERA and TRA plans, which you really don't have any control over other than the number of people you hire that are in those plans. The change from the prior year was mainly in that unrestricted net position category. Most of that 44 or $45 million decrease you see there relates directly back to increases in those pension liabilities, which was about $40 million. The other piece of that was you're spending down the general fund balance by about $5 million.
Was that about $30 million a one-time change?
Part of that $30 million liability is the $9 million change in OPEB that we talked about. The $30 million I was talking about is the pension liability and the OPEB liability in your district-specific plans. You do have a small pension plan that is district-owned and operated, and then the OPEB plan, which is also a district-specific plan. They're separate from the statewide PERA and TRA plans, so just differentiating those you actually have control of at the district level, whereas you don't really with the PERA and TRA plans.
Okay, thank you.
That was everything I had intended to discuss from a number standpoint. Questions?
No questions? Well.
All
I
right,
think that-
thank you.
I think the thanks goes to Margot, who managed our business in such a way that we had a clean audit. And raw.
And it takes everybody, to be honest, even if it's somebody out in the sites that manages $100 or you, the school board. So I appreciate the thank you, but it does take a whole team effort to include the auditors as well, so.
I'm just going to weigh in really quickly, too, and to do that in the first year of a whole new operating and finance system is pretty impressive. So that's a lot of change that really smooth things out in the future. So great job to you and the team, and thanks for the full review today.
Great, thank you. All right, next discussion items are policy updates. Usually Amir runs us through that. Has,
Legislative Action Committee first.
oh, sorry, Legislative Action Committee. Discussion item. And these are bylaws that we saw before, I think, at a work session. Have there been any changes to the bylaws since we've seen them?
Well, weren't there some little things that we suggested fixes to at our meeting on Wednesday? Because I just couldn't
Yes.
tell from the
Yes, I
document.
did
There
make
weren't
the-
the red lines like Sarah does for
Oh,
policy.
sorry. Sarah didn't do it.
As in, you did it, not.
I did it, and I did include those, and now I can't remember what you had asked me to do.
That's why I was asking. Yep. I know that.
One,
they
here is
small
one,
tweak,
the,
but-
I believe one of them was in the middle of the Article 2 purpose. You wanted it to insert, or it wasn't necessarily you, Sarah. We wanted to insert the word board for approval. So the activities of the LAC are subject to board approval. The other one was under, it was under F, I believe, E. No, it was,
Which article are you in?
we're in Article 6.
Okay.
Had to do with adding one, letter E in Article 6. Once the board has approved the positions and priorities set forth by the LAC, each LAC member will agree to have his or her name included as a member of the LAC in any communications pertaining to those positions and priorities that are set out on behalf of the LAC including letters to the editor and letters to legislators or other elected officials. And then the request was to add, all communications will be approved by the board.
Yes.
And that's been added.
Great, thank you.
Those were the only two changes, and they were made. Is there any other discussion? or
Well, I just
question?
wanted to, for the sake of the audience and the board, you worked off of your bylaws through through the committee, but also through other boards that have LACs. Do you want to just give us a little background on that, for the basis of the bylaws that you created?
Right. Two of the committee members actually did some research on what other communities were doing. There's several districts in the area that have legislative action committees, and they created these. And they have also, what's not so apparent to anybody who is not looking at the board book, is that they created an LAC policy on membership and conduct, which is it's going beyond what some other communities do, but I think it adds a great deal.
Okay, thank you.
Before we approve them, would you like to?
They're just for discussion.
They're for discussion this
discussion
month.
tonight.
We approve them
Before
next
we
month.
discuss them further, would you like to give the audience and everyone out there just an overview of the next steps for your committee and what you're planning?
Right, so tomorrow morning, I'm expecting to get a questionnaire back from our candidates for the State House of Representatives, 49A and 49B, and all four of them have agreed to fill out our questionnaire. We have talked with our communications department, and they will be putting those into our website. They're questions that were all developed through the Association of Metropolitan School Districts, and so these questions were presented by that body to both gubernatorial candidates at one of the meetings that we attended. So they have been vetted through that nonpartisan organization. So that people can look for those on our website, and they can also look for those in the Sun Current. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to be published, probably sometime next week. And the next thing after that is that we are developing a platform so that we can truly advocate for our schools at the state level. And the board's going to be seeing that platform, I believe, sometime mid-November. I think it's the November 13th meeting will be the first time that the board will get to meet the committee, and the committee can present for discussion our platform.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions or discussions on the LAC bylaws? Okay, now we will move to policy updates, and Amir usually does our policy updates. Do we have a stand-in for him?
So you sent an email, so what? I picked up the phone and called him. I didn't call down and gave him my.
Okay, so there are three policies, and what we are proposing is stylistic changes on all three. So not much to discuss. The only one that has any substantial change is the one for open meeting law. We have added a section that will say, talks about Skyping, meetings conducted by interactive technology. A meeting may be conducted by interactive technology, Skype, or other similar electronic means in compliance with Minnesota's state statute 13D.02. So we've added that.
So that was just simply added because it's following state law?
It is following state law.
Okay, good. And the other two policies seemed like it was just the basic, for some reason, we've changed ourselves from school board to board.
I was just going to ask that question. Do you know? It's totally fine. I'm curious as to why we've removed that word.
It's consistency. That process of redoing those started before I was on the board.
And Code of Ethics comes from it's an MSBA policy. Not all school districts have that.
So on 206, I understood that there was some discussion about agenda items. It's not in this particular draft, but I think that there was some discussion about public request for agenda items. Do you have any information on that?
I don't.
Okay.
Do you have any, what do you, I'm not sure what you're asking.
So the procedures for agenda items is a little bit, it could have been put together better. Let's just say it that way. And I know that it's based upon the statute, but the procedure applies for both
Yes.
the public as well as the kind of public forum area.
Okay.
So I think that we may see this again next month.
Subject. Yeah, well, this is up for discussion, but
Policy 206. Oh,
so it's under agenda item, procedures 6A, agenda items, number 1. So I believe that we made the change, or we would be suggesting that we make the change by saying that it is not community members who wish to have a subject discussed at a public school board meeting. I think we wanted to insert community members who wish to have a subject, or wish to recommend to have a subject. We were going to add the word wish to recommend to have a subject discussed at a public school board meeting. That was it's a nuance, but then it's a little more accurate because the chair and the superintendent are the only ones that are deciding agenda items, so.
So I would just suggest looking at 206A and C under Roman numeral 6, and there may be a way of creating some clarity that some of the rules under A apply to C, but C just kind of sits out there on its own.
do you have suggestions that you want to share with the committee?
Right, so I would make the procedures that are listed about recognizing one at a time, et cetera, those all would apply both to A and C. So you might look at it and go, okay, 206 agenda items, you could have a request for us to add something, and you can have a public forum, and both of them will follow this process in the event it becomes a discussion item. And I didn't go through and try to actually wordsmith it. I would just ask you to take a look at it the next time.
Yeah, because it's coming back for a vote next
Right.
meeting.
And if you're good with it,
Discussion
that's great.
right now.
I just want you to sort of call it out, take a look at it, and see. Anything new on 209?
Nope, they just changed the word school.
Got rid of those nasty school references. We got clarity on that. All right. Any other questions or discussion on policies 205, 206, 209? All right. So I did forget to reference, we do have a staff recognition, so I'm going to take a short moment to note that we did receive a commendation of Lisa Masika, who's the principal at Cornelia Elementary. A parent wrote in saying that she wants to, that parent, I don't know if it's a male or female, wants to say how great of a job the principal does at Cornelia. The person's amazed by the positive energy of every single staff member, and that Principal Masika does an amazing job. So thank you for the submission by the person in our community. And now we can go on to action items. The first, can I get a motion to accept the financial statements for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018, and the report of the accountants?
So moved.
Second.
And Margot, I take it that you have nothing to add beyond what we had in the discussion section.
You are correct. I have nothing to add.
And does anybody have any questions? All those in favor of accepting All those in favor of approving the motion to accept the financial statements for the fiscal year ending 2018 and the report from the accountant, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Can I get a motion to approve the various employee insurance contracts that are listed? And they are for insurance.
So moved.
Second. Second.
Give it to Owen. All right, Margot.
This year, every other year, every 2 years, we're required to go out for bid for our medical or health insurance. And so the district did that for the district plan. And I think solicited bids from 5 vendors, 2 responding. Overall, Blue Cross Blue Shield on a fully insured plan was the best option, with a 9.7% increase over 2018 and a rate cap of 9%. We don't know exactly what the percentage increase for 2019. The Insurance Committee and Finance and Facilities Committee reviewed these options, also looked at, again, we looked at self-insurance, a combination of things. We also looked at some additional plan choices, did some work with Blue Cross Blue Shield and our consultants on, excuse me, on that. And as a result, we are adding an additional limited plan network to our menu of options for district medical plan employees. And you can see the detail in your board resolution below. This limited network does have a listing of medical providers that an employee must go to. As we looked at last year's claims, 77% of our participants are already on the list in the limited network. So we think that this quite possibly will be a good option for our employees. And in any case, it'll be, they'll have some choices around, okay, if I want to open network, I can choose this, and this is the cost. If I want a limited network, this is the cost, along with my district benefit or whatever. There's a lot that goes into it. We do understand, as with any open enrollment, we always want to make sure we clearly communicate in any benefit plan what is available to employees so they make the best decision they can for their families. And so open enrollment is coming up. And we are excited about this additional option for employees, which averages a decrease of 2.2%. So I would answer any questions at this time. Gwen, did you have anything else? We worked together on this.
I was the board rep for this, and I actually was really impressed with the fact that the insurance company came back and brought a plan where employees could almost virtually keep their costs the same for next year if they're willing to go into the high-value plan. So I thought kudos to the team that worked with them, and the employees were, the representatives of the various bargaining groups were really pleased with the outcome. So it's nice to hear that our employees are happy.
I just had a quick question about the self-insurance option. Is that something that is not on the table at all for?
I think we as a district, and we talked about it at length at Finance and Facilities and at Insurance Committee, and it tends to be an annual discussion, but I think we have to have a conversation about if that's something we want to do. It needs to be a partnership between employer and employees. With the rates, and we did look at self-insurance, and Preferred One had a proposal for fully self-insured. We need to set the district up in a position with premiums from employees, but also with our own reserves to be able to manage that risk. And we can do that, but I think that needs to be a longer conversation through Finance and Facilities, as well as how we partner that. Having it 100% on the employee premium to set up those reserves may or may not bring that along. I think it has to be a partnership between both.
And from what we saw in the committee was that the cost was going to be more to go with the self-insurance, plus some risk to the district. So With most of our bargaining groups, and correct me if I'm wrong, we set in their contracts is agreement of what is contributed towards their health insurance in this case. So when the changes occur, generally it's not directly affected in the contract until they renegotiate their next contract.
Yeah, and I'll just make one more comment. There are a few complicating components to going self-insured. When it works, it can work really well, but you have to take a certain reserve level, you have a certain liability level, and then you have to have all groups want to participate in it to get that kind of deferred risk across the larger population. So those are three caveats, and if any one of those, there are three pillars, and if any one of those three is out of whack, you don't want to go that route. So I think the external group and the finance group did a really good job looking through all those options and weighing them. So it was a thorough look through, and we can do that every year. But this year, it was extremely higher. It was
Yes, and I don't disagree. It's a topic that tends to bubble up and then.
And I thought it was a good question. That's why I went
Yeah.
at length, so it's on record that it was, those three things all have to
Absolutely.
be lined up, and at least 2 out of 3 weren't this year. So
Yep.
it's a good option to keep revisiting.
I just wanted
every
to make sure we had the
Yeah.
status for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
We did look into it thoroughly, and those
Oh,
are the
yeah.
reasons why we move forward with this option.
And we've been talking about it, because I think I've been on this actually since I got on the board. So I know we've talked about it for a long time. And the gentleman who is the rep did a very good job at explaining it, and all the companies that did or did not choose to participate. It was well done. And at this point, too, we don't have 100% of our district participating in our district program. So, there's numbers, there's lots of different factors that affect it.
All right.
Margot, could you help me understand this? So our insurance rates are really not going up much. I'm seeing in the background paragraph that it says the BCBS with an overall increase of 9.7%. What's the increase of 9.7% about?
So on our existing plans, we have currently with Blue Cross Blue Shield, but we have a $500 deductible plan, a $1,500 deductible plan, and $4,000 deductible plan in a fully open network. A participant can go to any medical facility and get coverage. And so those existing plans that we've always had will have a premium increase on average of a 9.7%. Industry average is 6.5 to 8.5, I believe. We're adding an additional option for employees with a limited network plan with the $500 deductible, $1,500 deductible, and $4,000 deductible. And that limited network plan is actually a decrease from what employees are currently paying.
Okay. Thank you for spelling that out.
So, by the way, I do think it's great that we're able to offer the two different plans, the sort of renewal of last year's, as well as the limited network. And I know that you'll do a great job. I think it's important on the limited network to make sure that people that sign up for that understand which providers are included and which are not. So that, we can never get rid of the risk that someone will call us 6 months later and go, I didn't know that children's wasn't included or something wasn't included. But I think that's a key provision, and insurance and coverage is really complicated.
I think we agree, and we have been talking about that and how we make sure that that is clearly communicated to our staff.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? All right, all those in favor of approving the medical and employee insurance contracts listed, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, can I get a motion to approve policies 103 and 509?
So,
And have there been any changes to 103 or 509 since last month?
We were asked to strike 3 items out of 103, and that was to make it consistent with other policies. And so that's the only, with 413. So it is, that is the only policy change. to 103, and 509 is just stylistic.
Any questions? All those in favor of approving the revisions to policies 103 and 509, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. We are on to announcements. Are there any announcements tonight? None. Great. All right. We've completed our agenda. Are there any objections to adjourning?
Did you want us to give any committee report updates, Mr. Chair?
That would be within the updates, if people have them. I know we've talked about starting to include committee updates. I don't know if we're yet ready this month to roll it out.
Okay. Well, just for teaching and learning, we primarily talked about our agenda for the year and things that we're working on. The committee asked for an update as to next steps on a survey for pre-AP 10, and the fact that the board had requested an embedded honors program within pre-AP 10 for semester 2. So the director of teaching and learning will be getting back to us on that. Overall, I'd say that some of our biggest things this year, we just talked about middle school schedule in our work session. But otherwise, we have, the usual things on the agenda. The one thing that will be earlier this year, per the request I know of the full board, is our class recommendations, so that we don't feel that pinch in January. So the first round of course changes, whether they're deletions or additions or revisions, would be in November at committee, and then to you guys as a discussion. And then we would approve those in December, giving the principals plenty of time to prepare catalogs and kids to register, I believe, late January, early February. Do you have anything to add as a fellow member, Erica?
No, you did an excellent job providing an update.
Great. Well, maybe you should give a quick update on communications, since we just chatted as a group earlier this evening.
So Lenny, Sarah, and I were in charge of a communications ad hoc committee looking at how the board can provide better communication and transparency with the community. And we had 7 community members that met with us over the summer, and we came up with a list of around 40 ideas that we pared down to maybe 25, and we just brought them back to the board tonight. Our top 25 ideas that were prioritized, and we wanted to get school board feedback and consensus from all the board as to what we should prioritize of those ideas. So we have a good idea of those items that they like, and anything from, I think some ideas that really resonated with us were things such as live streaming the meetings on YouTube, so people can see the meetings when they're at home. They don't have to come here. To creating a sort of school board 101 presentation and maybe video to explain to people what does the school board do, what's in and out, what does the district do, so people can understand different roles. But there's a lot of stuff that hopefully you'll see some positive changes in the communication from the school district, and you can, if anyone in the community has additional ideas, feel free to contact me or Sarah or Lenny, and we'll be glad to put it into our idea bin, so that look for stuff to roll out. Well, after I talked to John about rollout resources, so that's it. Thank you.
And then on a strategic plan, I know we had an audience member ask about that tonight, and actually the ad hoc committee for strategic plan will be meeting with our consultant tomorrow afternoon to get an update and reconnect on our schedule for the plan, and jump in, Alan and Matt, if you have any comments, and John, of course. And I know that he's been meeting actually with leadership in the district, principals, he's met with board members, he's working on some one-on-one with various stakeholders in the community, and then we will be working on focus groups, community forums where parents, community members, stakeholders can come and share their thoughts on the strategic plan. And then I believe there's also going to be a district-wide survey that will be available as well. We're still working out the details on those things, but there will be lots of places to get input from our community as we work on this strategic plan. And I'm sure that the question that was asked tonight by the community member will be just one of many things that will be addressed in the strategic plan. Any other thing that I'm missing, Ellen? Matt?
I guess in relation to one question asked tonight as well, is we're also considering which of those agenda items were discussed earlier in the year that will be folded into the strategic plan, and which will require additional conversation and resourcing and discussion outside of the strategic plan, and trying to delineate those two things as well in the next 2 months, because we definitely have a lot to address, but it's got to be done in kind of a complete roll-up fashion. So I think it's coming together really well, and I think it'll be very metric heavy, which is what I think a lot of people wanted to see.
And I think to Ellen's, who's been a real great promoter of making sure that we not only have a strategic plan, but that it has an implementation plan that goes with it. And I think some of those things where we're getting those direct questions from the community will really come up in the implementation of the plan. Yeah.
And I think one of the things from your communications committee was committee updates at the end of the meeting. All right.
So thank you for doing that, Sarah.
All right, anything else for tonight? Any objection to adjourning? Hearing none. We are adjourned. Thank you.